move straight on to actually having the privilege of introducing Catriona Milne. Now, Catriona has been known to me for many years, but I think this might be the first time maybe we've met in the past, I don't know. Anyway, it's a delight and a joy to introduce her. She's an advocate and a well-known social worker and educator. She works at Uniting Vic Tas region branch, and prior to that has worked with MacKillop Family Services for a very long time. She has worked with the Wesleyan Mission in Melbourne to start the Heritage Service with a brief to create a new and responsive service. After Uniting Vic Tas was formed from 25 former individual organisations, she continued to build the service. She's an expert in Catholic records services and systems. And her expertise is in the provision of access to out-of-home care records and adoption records. And with no further ado, it is my delight to introduce you.
Thank you.
Catriona, just starting up the slide presentation for you.
Thank you.
Let's go.
Yeah, just this. Thank you for being here, and I also would like to acknowledge I am from Wurundjeri land in Victoria, and I've got to get this right, Ngunnawal land here in Canberra, and I would like to acknowledge that these lands have never been ceded, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So, the Uniting Heritage Service, is the slide up? No. This is a talk about responding to lost records and rebuilding from other sources. The Uniting Heritage Service the Uniting Church was formed in 1977 when the Methodist, Congregational and Presbyterian churches joined together. This included most of their welfare organisations. The foundation was thus laid for the current Uniting Heritage Service. By 2016, the Uniting Church in Victoria and Tasmania had about 26 different welfare bodies providing a range of services. The largest was Wesleyan Mission. 9 of these agencies had started as children's homes or adoption and out-of-home care providers. In 2017, following a major review by the Uniting Church in Victoria and Tasmania, it was decided to join all these agencies into one, a huge merger. 600 programs, 3,500 staff, 2,500 volunteers. We are now simply known as Uniting. So, with the Uniting Heritage Service was formed just prior to this merger in 2016, when Wesleyan Mission appointed me as coordinator. With the formation of Uniting in 2017, the Heritage Service expanded. In 2021, it was calculated that Uniting holds records for 30,000 children and young people, and more recent discoveries, which keep happening, have increased this number. The records date from 1881 to the present time and are still being created. The Heritage Service acts as a single entry point for any records created by these founding agencies, and also for more recent out-of-home care records. The earliest records come from the Scots Church Neglected Children's Aid Society, and Annie was the first recorded child on the 10th of July 1881, found in Bennett's Lane on her own, very close to where the Wesley Church was situated. We have inherited some significant and rich collections that include visitors' books, handwritten committee minutes, individual files, registers, diaries, index cards, and some 20,000 photographs. Records have changed dramatically since 1881. Large registers and single-page admission forms were followed by index cards and handwritten records replaced by typed sheets. I'll just put this down. Early records, though brief, contained rich detail. Later ones include hundreds of pages of emails, reports, where each meal, outing and phone call is recorded. The Methodist Homes for Children followed in 1891 and Tally Ho Farm Home for Boys in 1905. Two babies' homes were founded in 1928 and 1929, and two homes for pregnant, often unmarried women. All these were in Melbourne. Homes extended to rural Victoria when a training farm near Sale started in 1925, and in 1950 the mansion Darrangal near Shepparton, now a low security prison, housed 100 children and young people from the UK until it closed in 1964. Later, smaller homes opened to house boys leaving the larger institutions, and in the 1980s the Uniting Church started residential and foster care services in Wimmera and Western Melbourne. The most significant destruction of records was at Tally Ho. This had been explained as due to fires. We must have had so many fires and floods across Australia. But a search of old minutes and other existing records did tell of 3 fires, none of which destroyed individuals' records. It was important to document what records had been created and lost, so we knew what we had lost and we could tell people what had been created. This involved following up former staff. A former social worker at Tally Ho, now in her 80s, described the then superintendent deciding to destroy the records to avoid having to store them when they moved buildings. He destroyed records from 1905 to 1980. Hundreds and hundreds of children's stories. She knew that this was wrong. It was her first job. She felt very powerless. However, she secreted some boxes of index cards in her office, which contain basic information about residents' dates, family movements, and some personal details such as height and hair colour. And that's all we have for some people. When we started to gather these records from the night agencies, we noticed other gaps. Harrison House, a smaller home in suburban Melbourne, had absolutely no consumer records. Kilmany Park in Sale, which is this home here, had only 2 admission registers and no individual records. This is a photo of Kilmany Park that I wanted to put here because this is the way the boys saw it. All the photos you'll see elsewhere, it's now a bed and breakfast, are from the front. The boys never got into the front. This was their entrance from the back. So this is the one we use. And we know this because we speak to them. The founding agencies of Uniting accepted responsibility for young people and children, and Uniting has a moral obligation to them and their families. Profound, life-changing decisions were made by these predecessor organisations, and we must learn from this and be accountable for these decisions. We looked at past Tally Ho requests and could see how often nothing was found. And as we started to meet Tally Ho residents, we could see the effects of this. They described feeling invisible, devalued and so angry. They understandably believed that we held records and were refusing to release them, or had deliberately destroyed the records. As the sole person in the service at that stage, I was given autonomy and support to demonstrate Uniting's values, which include being bold, imaginative and respectful. As time went on, Uniting committed more funding, and we also took on the Adoption Information Service. 18 months into the service, it was clear that the skills of an archivist were needed to manage these complex and diverse collections. We are now a team of 6, 3 admin and 3 people who directly work with consumers, and 5 volunteers. And you'll notice if you're watching, there's actually only 5 people in that slide, but we have one more to show you later. It was our responsibility to offer other types of support and also to source records in innovative ways. We learnt from the people who contacted us seeking records. Their memories and ideas gave us direction, as did some of the former staff, and other records that we did have, such as annual reports and some photos. We started with Tally Ho because it was the largest home, had the most requests and had the biggest gaps. Grants enabled us to search every one of 1,400 boxes. Names of boys were extracted from lists of boys at Tally Ho in correspondence and agency reports to government. The cash books and wages books contain names of inmates receiving government subsidies, so they were indexed. We spoke directly with as many staff as we could find, mainly from the 1970s and early 1980s, to record their memories and explanations of what records they had created. Creating records from memory was the name we gave to a project aimed at using memories to give us individual names. A reference group, including consumer representatives, worked with 2 paid researchers to interview 10 people, former staff and past residents of Tally Ho. These people described the boys that they remembered, their memories of daily life and staff. This, in some cases, is the only record in some case that a particular boy lived there. As new records with names of past residents were accumulated, the service started to develop checklists for each home, which are continually being added to. This is page 1 of 4 pages of a Tally Ho checklist. We also found records from other, more unexpected sources. Tally Ho was very involved in the scouting movement, and when requested, Scouting Victoria gave us a copy of the list of boys named in the Tally Ho Scout group. Last year I met with a man born in the 1940s who had lived at Tally Ho. The only record was the line entry in the Tally Ho Scouts in 1952. This was helpful as it gave him a date that he'd not known before or remembered, and could place his time at Tally Ho in his own story. We contacted the Victorian Education Department, who hold records of the school, and with requesters' consent they will streamline the process for accessing any school records. Past residents send us photos, and this is a handwritten map from Glenn, who wrote maps from memory, which we put in our newsletter. Other support may be to include locating other boys that they were well connected with and had very close relationships with as children. We've also started using DNA testing to support people to find family. This is the gist of an email that I received in August 2018 in bold, in capital letters. Dear Sir, Madam, I was at Tally Hell and want my records. I've been searching for years, which makes me think there's a cover-up. I'm not getting any answers. Year and a half later, on the 23rd of December, this is the gist of an email from the same person who we're still in touch with. In lowercase, good morning. Just to say thank you very much for what you are doing for me, and to wish you a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. We offer an open-ended service and only finish with people when they choose to end the connection. So there are people we're still in touch with after 6 or 7 years. Organising reunions also gives us impetus to seek additional records. If one or two people express a wish to meet with others from the same home, we work with them to organise these. The first gathering, pictured here, was for men from Kilmany Park Farm Home for Boys in 2017. To prepare for this, we visited historical societies for any information, revealing, among other things, a list of boys from Kilmany Park attending local primary schools and some committee minutes. We'd also worked with the Uniting Church Archive to receive a grant from Find and Connect, to whom we're very grateful and who have got representatives here. This enabled administrative records from Kilmany Park committee minutes, cash books and wages books to be searched, and all names of boys extracted onto a database. From these snippets, people can flesh out their own story. Superintendents' reports would name the boys entering and leaving Kilmany Park, something of their situation and their achievements in sport or some other capacity. At the local high school, we were able to scan high qualities of the former technical school magazines covering the period of Kilmany Park's operation. This is a picture of people at the reunion looking at the information that we'd found. Durringyle, another home where a similar search was made prior to a reunion for men. One of the heritage team travelled to nearby Murchison in rural Victoria, Shepparton and Tatura. She decided to find records for every person who was attending the gathering, about 15 in all, and they had family with them as well. Names were located in ship's passenger lists, minutes, oral histories, and even a card signed by about 10 of the men. This is a quote from Brian, who attended the reunion. Thanks ever so much for the copy of the yearbook. This was the school yearbook. It's the first I've ever seen of it. I've gone through every word and come across so many familiar names and activities at Shepparton Tech. I really appreciate the untiring efforts you and the team pursue. Now I can prove to my friends I was not always the big dummy. Please pass on my heartfelt thanks to the Uniting team for the ongoing and valuable assistance. In July 2022, and this is our 6th team member, this is Olivia, our archivist. She had to have her own special photo. In July 2022, the continuing Presbyterian Church in Victoria, after 3 years of negotiation, agreed to give us their out-of-home care records. This revealed records for some smaller hostels and gave us more records to add to those already in the collection. And as I said, this features our archivist Olivia with Michael from the Presbyterian Archives on the day of the handover. Our largest project to date has been the collection of photographs from the Methodist and Presbyterian babies' homes. A woman who spent the first 7 months of her life at the Methodist babies' home asked if she could visit there. She told me she'd found a Facebook page where former trainee mothercraft nurses had posted photos of babies and small children. And I thought, I bet they've got photos we don't know about. We were able to access the lists of women who had worked and lived at the Methodist babies' home as trainee mothercraft nurses in the 1950s, 60s and 70s. We obtained funding and started organising small gatherings of these women, this is a photo of, sitting with them and with each person to record names and anecdotes of the children pictured in their photos. Similarly, we have now met with past nurses from the Presbyterian babies' home, and this is the 4th year of this project. To date, we have collected about 5,000 named photographs, and they are almost all digitised and indexed. There have been 2 really significant spin-offs from this project. When we're approached for records, if we find photos, we also know who donated the photo. If the person wishes it, we can arrange for a meeting between the child and the former nurse. For people who rarely remember this time in their lives, this can be a profound experience. And this is a photo of Richard and Gwen looked after Richard when he was 1 year old. This is a story, a quote from Richard. When I heard that a meeting was set up for me to meet Gwen, who was one of the nurses at the baby's home, I was very excited and nervous at the same time. As soon as I walked in the room, I felt some sort of connection with her and felt like I've known her all my life. Even though it's been 50 years, but I still can't remember anything from the baby's home. We sat there for a couple of hours looking at photos, and Gwen was explaining what it was like at the home. For example, she explained how they used to clean our teeth with salt as they didn't have toothpaste. She genuinely loves nursing and children, and I feel that I was very lucky to have her looking after me during my early years of development. I've had a pretty rough childhood, and a lot of my friends through teenage years are in jail or have passed on from drugs. I, however, have always had common sense and looked after the underdog, and I'm a caring person. My children also have these attributes. These attributes, I'm pretty sure, that I owe to Gwen and the nurses from my early childhood. The second spin-off happened in August this year when we held 2 gatherings for people who'd been babies and infants at the Methodist Babies Home and the Presbyterian Babies Home in the 1960s and 1970s. Selected former Mothercraft trainees spoke with them about their memories of the home, daily life and their care of the children and babies. There were many tears, and we were all surprised by the strength of the connections and openness of all the participants. One man realised that one of the women there would have looked after him as a baby. 2 others found that they were at the nursery in the Presbyterian Babies Home at the same time. This is what people said at the gathering and just after. I'm aware that I've always had some sense of abandonment, and now it's gone. Another man said, I feel like I've had a huge hug. I just wanted to let you know how much I enjoyed today. All my tears were happy tears. I realise now I was always in very good hands when I had no control over what was happening in my life. Thank you and your team for your efforts. It's a day I will always remember. So this is the last slide, and this is about learnings. We've learnt so much in the last 6 years of our operations. The Heritage Service has been instrumental in supporting improvement in record-keeping practices throughout Uniting. We have worked with current staff and communities of practice to update the way file notes and records are recorded, the way people are written about in records, and the sort of records that are kept. We also have spent $60,000 from grants and in-house funding on digitising records. At a rough guess, only 10% of the entire collection has been digitised to archival standards. Current priorities are to index and digitise the records most requested and to record oral histories before it's too late. The records are stored mainly in off-site storage and some in a secure room at our office in Melbourne, and records are constantly being ordered, scanned and returned. Our purpose is to support people to learn more of their larger story, not just our little part of it. We have a fund to pay for records from various registries of births, deaths and marriages, and more recently will help pay for DNA testing. We subscribe to Ancestry.com and use Trove and Public Records Victoria and other public record sites to search for additional records if requested. People will often have been wards of the state. We also request those on their behalf if they wish. We continue to learn about the importance of honouring people's lives and stories by keeping records, managing them and preserving them and making them as accessible as possible. It's also about being creative and really listening to what people are seeking. When they say, I wish I knew more about, or wouldn't it be great if, or I wonder why, we follow up. Finding everything we can and sitting with the person when they receive their records is at the heart of what we do. It's fitting to finish with two quotes from the daughter of a past resident. That was such a great session A and I had with you on Tuesday. Thank you so much for all the research you did on our behalf and for such an enlightening and considerate meeting. It was moving to have Dad's early life laid out and to see how little childhood, by our standards, he was allowed. But very satisfying to have finally got the record straight. On a wider level, it also gave us a glimpse into what an emotional experience it must be for the people who come to Uniting to recover their own direct history and how respectfully Heritage Service works to ease and help on these occasions. And finally, from a past resident, thank you for your support and kindness in offering to assist me in my search for information. I am most grateful to you. I'm very relieved that you are assisting me with my quest to access the information which I'm anxious to acquire for the reasons we discussed. I am still anxious, but less so after speaking with you, knowing that you are prepared to assist me in my quest. Thank you.
Thank you, Catriona.